This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Progress.
Okay, good Erev Shabbos Rabbi Sai. How's everybody doing today? Afreilichen Purim Katan. Did you know that? Did you know that today is Purim Katan? Today is the small Purim. What are you going to do about that? How are you celebrating Purim Katan? So the Mechaber tells us in Siman Taf Reish Tzadi Zayin on the 14th and 15th of Adar Rishon, we don't say Tachnan, we don't say Lam Natseach, we're not maspid, we don't fast, but other things we are not noiheg, meaning we do not have a Suda. And not only do we not have a Suda, the only thing that we are limited by is we don't eulogize and we don't fast, but there's no Chiyuv Suda. And then the Mechaber says, some say that you're even allowed to eulogize and fast. However, the Ramah says the minhag is Kasfar Rishona, that it's usher to eulogize and fast. But there's no requirement to have a Suda. Then the Ramah says, some say you are chayiv to increase in party and in happiness. B'yud daled sheba Adar Rishon on the 14th of Adar Rishon. Okay, so this is a day that of the tour in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz, that there is a chiyuv of Suda on Yud Daled. However, the Ramah says ve'ein noihagin kain. It is not the custom to have a Suda on Purim Katan. So for Sfardim, there is no inyan of a Suda on Purim Katan. For Ashkenazim, there is an opinion, but it's not the minhag. However, the Ramah says Mikal Makoim Yarbek Tzas B'Suda. Nevertheless, you should increase your Suda a little bit, Kedei Lotzei Sidei HaMachmirim, in order to be Yotzei those who are Machmir. You want to be Yotzei the Machmirim, and therefore, V'toiv Lev Mishteh Tamid. Someone who is a good heart is always at a party. Someone who is a good heart is always at a party. So the Ramah very interestingly concludes the his final comments on Orach Chaim, V'toiv Lev Mishteh Tamid. Why exactly does Ramah conclude Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim with the pasuk V'toiv Lev Mishteh Tamid? So the Mishnah Berurah says that in the Hagois Tashbeitz he writes that you should be Marbe B'Suda. And Rabbeinu Yechiel mi Paris was Ragel to be Marbe B'Suda and to be Mazin B'nei Adam. And when the Ramah ends off at Toiv Lev Mishteh Tamid, meaning it's a good idea to be Marbe in the covet of the Nes that was done in these times. In other words, the Mishnah Berurah understands V'toiv Lev Mishteh Tamid is that you should indeed have a Suda on Purim Katan. Very interesting. But why would the Ramah end with the pasuk V'toiv Lev Mishteh Tamid? So I want to share with you about the inyan of having a Suda on Purim Katan. The Mishnah in Megillah on Davav Amadei says, Ein bein Adar Harishon Adar Hasheni ala kriyas HaMegillah matan savyanim. There's no difference between Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni except for reading the Megillah and matanas savyanim. That would seem like then Adar Rishon you don't read the Megillah and you don't give matanas savyanim, and Adar Sheni you read the Megillah and you give matanas savyanim. But that implies that Legabe Sudas Purim and Legabe Mishlayach Manos, you do fulfill them in Adar Aleph. Very interesting. Now, the Gemara is Medayek, but regarding the Seder Parshios, they're the same. Okay. There are 3 shitos regarding Seudos on Adar Rishon, on Purim Katan. There are three general opinions. Let me get this up for you. What are the 3 opinions? Let me get this. You have the opinion of Tosfos that you do not make a Suda, not on Yudalid and not on Tesvav. If you look at Tosfos on Daf Vav Amud Beis, Tosfos brings that Yesh noagin lasos yimei Mishteh v'simcha b'arba asar v'chamisha asar shel Adar Rishon. Some do have a Suda on the 14th and the 15th. V'riyat ha'demasni senami mashmakein. The flow of the Mishnah implies this, because it says the only difference between Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni is Mikra Megillah Movad, Matanas of Yonim. That implies that regarding Mishteh and Simcha they're the same. But Tosfos says it doesn't seem to be correct, because the Gemara says regarding eulogizing and fasting, you can't do an either. But that implies there is no chiyuv of Simcha and Mishteh. So therefore, says Tosfos, v'chein halacha she'ein sarach lahachmer lasos Mishteh v'simcha b'adar rishon. The halacha is you do not have to be machmer and have a Mishteh v'simcha and adar rishon. So you hear this? There are two deos in Tosfos. One deo is that the Mishnah, and this is very interesting, the Mishnah is mashma that you should have a Suda and Mishlach Manos and Adar Rishon, because it says the only difference is Mikra Megillah Matasa of Yoinim, but Suda and Mishlach Manos they're the same. But then the Gemara is mashma that regarding Hesped and Tainus, they're the same. That implies Legabe Mishteh v'Simcha, they're not the same. And Tosfos feels that's the halacha. The opinion of Tosfos is you do not have to have a Suda in Adar Rishon. There's a third opinion. The opinion of the Ran is that it's reasonable, Karev Hadavar, that you should be marbe b'Suda b'Yadalet shabarishon. That the Ran seems to say you should be marbe b'Suda, but only on the 14th and not the 15th. Okay? So Tosfos brings the day of the 14th and the 15th. The Ran says only the 14th, but Tosfos' conclusion is you don't have to do either. So Rabbi Kiva Eger has a beautiful reading of V'toiv Leiv Mishteh Tamid, a little different than the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah reads V'toiv Leiv Mishteh Tamid, that there are various opinions whether you should have a Suda. It's a good thing to have a Suda. Toiv Leiv Mishteh Tamid. You might as well be Yotzei, the more stringent Shita. The Rabbi Kiva Eger has a different reading of this. Rabbi Kiva Eger says that if you study Tosfos that we just learned, we pointed out that the Mishnah implies that you should have a Suda and Mishlach Manos on Purim Katan, because it says Ein Bein Ella Mikra Megillah and Matanas of Yoinim, but not Suda and not Mishlach Manos. But the Gemara is mashma that you don't have to have a Suda. So the Mishnah implies you should have a Suda, and the Gemara implies you don't have to have a Suda. Now, says Rabbi Kiva Eger, it is well known, the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Kuf Amud Beis. The Gemara darshans the pasuk. All of the days of the poor man are bad. These are those who learn Gemara. Someone who learns Gemara, it's tough sailing, Balei Talmud, but V'toiv Leiv Mishteh Tamid are those who learn Mishnayos. Says Rabbi Kiva Eger, that's why the Ramah says V'toiv Leiv Mishteh Tamid, that in fact you should be marbe in Mishteh v'Simcha, even in Adar Rishon. Why? Like the Mishnah is mashma. Because those who learn Mishnayos, they're called Toiv Leiv Mishteh Tamid. And about such people we could say Toiv Leiv Mishteh Tamid, who are Balei Mishnah. Balei Mishnah are the Toiv Leiv Mishteh Tamid. Okay. The Chida, I was just soicha to be in Livorno. Livorno is where the Chida lived in the last 27 years of his life. I was at the place where we found, actually, the original gravestone of the Chida before he was moved to Har Menuchos. It was broken, and Meir Gabay put up a lucite plaque of what it said on the original Matzeva. There are also a number of Gedolim who are buried there. By one of them it says he was from the Bnei Bayis of the Chida who published the Chida's commentary to the Zayar. Another Gadol, it said that he was one of the three Gedolim who was maspid the Chida. So Livorno is definitely the city of the Chida. The Chida has a beautiful interpretation of the pasuk V'toiv Leiv Mishteh Tamid. Those with a good heart are always at a party. The Chida points out that the Ramah begins and ends his comments on Shulchan Aruch with a specific word. The opening comments of the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi Tamid. I place Hashem before me always. That's very connected to Purim time. As we pointed out, Shilas is Rashi Tevois, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi Tamid. On the other hand, the Rama ends Shulchan Aruch Archaim, V'toiv leiv Mishteh Tamid. Isn't it telling that he begins with the word Tamid and he ends with the word Tamid? He begins Shivisi Hashem lenegdi Tamid and he ends V'toiv leiv Mishteh Tamid. So the Chidah says these are the two Tamidim. They're two constants. Like in Karbanos, we have a Tamid Shel Shachar and a Tamid Shel Bein Rabayim. Says the Chidah, if one fulfills Shivisi Hashem lenegdi Tamid, I place Hashem before me Tamid, they will be able to be V'toiv leiv Mishteh Tamid. They will be able to be with a good heart always at a simcha. So the two Tamidim are contingent upon each other. If you fulfill Shivisi Hashem lenegdi Tamid, you will reach the madrega of V'toiv leiv Mishteh Tamid. Okay. Now, I saw one other interpretation of V'toiv leiv Mishteh Tamid. Because, we just discussed there's a machlokes, should you have a Suda on Purim Katan? Some opinions say you should. The Ran says on Yudalid. Tosfos brings even some who hold Yudalid Tesvav. Tosfos' conclusion is you don't have to. So the Rama says V'toiv leiv Mishteh Tamid. Question though, what about Mishleach Manos? Are you supposed to give Mishleach Manos today? Am I supposed to deliver to your house a basket of Laffy Taffies and Hamantashen? Is there any inyan of Mishleach Manos on Purim Katan? So, I came across a very interesting argument of the Kesav Sofer. The Kesav Sofer, and the end of this week's Parsha, he quotes the Rama, who brings the machlokes whether we're marbe b'simcha Purim Katan. And he says Tosfos is medayik from the Mishnah that you do have Mishteh v'simcha on both. And Tosfos doesn't say, well, what about Mishleach Manos? Says Kesav Sofer, I found the Ran, quoted by the Beis Yosef, that the Ran says Mishleach Manos, you're not mechuyev. Why? Mishleach Manos is Bechlal Matanos Avyonim. And since we don't give Matanos Avyonim, you don't have to give Mishleach Manos. But it's interesting because Tosfos doesn't discuss Mishleach Manos, and usually Mishleach Manos is not part of Matanos Avyonim, it's usually part of the Suda. Therefore the Kesav Sofer says that the reason for Mishleach Manos is to provide people with food for Sudas Purim, to bring people simcha so that they have food for Sudas Purim. And in fact, the Kesav Sofer says, it's brought in Shulchan Aruch that if someone's providing a meal for others, maybe you don't have to send Mishleach Manos, because the whole purpose of Shalach Manos is to provide people for Mishteh v'simcha. Says the Kesav Sofer. Now we understand why Tosfos only discusses whether you have a Suda on Purim. But Tosfos doesn't discuss whether you give Mishleach Manos on Purim. You know why? Because it's Haba Hatalia on Mishteh v'simcha. So it comes out, someone who's machmir to be marbe b'simcha, he should also give Mishleach Manos. He shouldn't sort of pull the rope on both ends and say, well, I'll be machmir to have a Suda and be, so to speak, selfish and feed myself, but when it comes to Mishleach Manos, that I'll be makel on and I won't send to other people. Is that reasonable? That when it comes to your own meal, you'll be machmir, and when it comes to sending food to others, you'll be makel? No! You should provide others with food also. If you have a good heart, then not only should you have a Suda, you should also have Mishleach Manos. That's why the Rama ends, says the Kesav Sofer, V'toiv leiv, someone who has a good heart, Mishteh Tamid. Not only will he have a Suda himself, he'll utilize his good heart also to give Mishleach Manos to others. So it's interesting that there is a deya that not only should you be try to be careful to have a Suda today, but to give Mishlach Manos as well. Again, that's not normally paskin in the Paiskim, but there is such an opinion in Kesav Sefer. And now, I want to share with you, what about tomorrow? Shushan Purim Katan.
Recording stopped.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.